In every journey of growth, there's a moment before the moment. A moment when everything is still, when the world is quiet, and all you have is a spark inside you, waiting to awaken. It's a spark you may not always see, a spark others may overlook, but it never disappears. It grows in silence, gathers strength in the shadows, and prepares you for something greater. And then, the first crack appears. A crack in old habits, a crack in old beliefs, a crack in the story you were told about your limits. That crack widens, your perspective shifts, your vision sharpens, and suddenly, there's no going back. Because once you see your potential, you cannot deny it. The spark becomes a surge, the surge becomes a wave, and the wave becomes a burst of pure possibility, breaking through every layer of doubt, every barrier, every shadow that once held you down. In that burst, something new emerges, a new identity, a new posture, a new sense of purpose. You stand taller, clearer, stronger. And from that moment on, you don't walk into the future the same way. You step forward with confidence, with intention, with the power to transform not just your work, but your life. This is your awakening. This is where your transformation begins. Every transformation begins with intention, but only culture determines whether it survives. Culture isn't the posters on the walls or the values we recite during onboarding. Culture is what people actually do when no one is watching. The habits they reinforce, the behaviors they reward, and the norms they refuse to compromise. In this episode, we explore how culture becomes the fuel that keeps change alive long after the excitement fades, how shared beliefs shape momentum, how leaders influence the emotional climate of their teams, and how organizations can build cultures that don't just support change, but demand it. This is where change stops being an event and becomes identity. Culture is the invisible operating system that determines how people think, how they behave, and what they allow to happen inside an organization. Policies influence decisions, systems shape workflows, but culture decides what people actually do when no one is watching. This is why major change efforts collapse even when the strategy is brilliant and the execution is disciplined. If the culture doesn't shift, the old habits quietly take control again. Culture determines what feels normal, what feels rewarded, and what feels risky. It defines how teams communicate, how they handle conflict, how they respond to pressure, and how they adapt when faced with the unknown. And the truth is this: no transformation is complete, and no transformation is permanent until culture absorbs it. That's why episode 4 is dedicated entirely to understanding culture, reshaping it deliberately, and building the reinforcement loops that make change stick for the long haul. Culture is the most challenging dimension of any transformation because it is never changed directly. Culture is the accumulation of signals, what people see, what they experience, what leaders reinforce, and what the system rewards. You cannot announce culture into existence. You shape it by shaping the environment people make decisions inside of. This is why culture change always trails execution and capability work. When people repeatedly experience consistency, alignment between what leaders say, what the systems support, and what their peers do, the culture begins to shift on its own. Culture is not built through intention. It's built through repeated proof. Peter Senge's 5 disciplines form the core of a true learning organization. At the center of this model is continuous learning, the driving force that keeps people, teams, and entire cultures moving forward. The first discipline is personal mastery. This is the individual commitment to growth, the desire to keep improving, learning, and elevating your own capabilities. Next is mental models, the deeper assumptions and beliefs that shape how we think and act. When we confront and refine our mental models, we open the door to clearer judgment and smarter decisions. The third discipline is shared vision. This is where purpose becomes collective. A shared vision aligns people behind a meaningful direction and makes commitment, not compliance, the standard. The fourth discipline is team learning, which turns groups into collaborative engines. It's not just about working together, it's about learning together, building shared insights that no individual could create alone. And finally, systems thinking. This discipline helps us see the big picture, how actions, processes, and behaviors connect. When we think in systems, we lead with awareness, strategy, and long-range impact. Together, these 5 disciplines create a continuous learning loop. Senge's model becomes the learning engine of the entire culture. Culture isn't something an organization declares, it's something it reinforces. Every behavior triggers a response. That response, positive, negative, or indifferent, creates reinforcement. Over time, those reinforcements become the norms people begin to expect. And once a norm takes hold, it becomes the culture. Not because someone mandated it, but because it became predictable. And here's the part most leaders overlook. Culture doesn't just record behavior, it influences the next one. This loop runs continuously in every team, every meeting, every decision. If you want to change culture, you don't start with slogans. You start by reshaping the reinforcement patterns that shape behavior. Burnout in organizations is rarely about emotional weakness. It's about behavioral overload. People are often asked to change how they work, think, communicate, collaborate, report, and prioritize, all at once. But without the right support structures, even highly capable teams reach their breaking point. When new behaviors pile up faster than the organization removes friction, people start rationing their effort. When psychological safety is low, they hide stress instead of voicing it. And when feedback loops are missing, leaders don't realize people are burning out until performance collapses. Behavioral load explains why good people get exhausted in bad systems. Fix the system, and people recover. Ignore the system, and burnout becomes the culture. Culture is not shaped by what organizations say. It's shaped by what they actually do. It's built through the patterns people experience every day, not the posters on the wall and not the speeches leaders give. It's shaped by what leaders tolerate, what they react to, and who they choose to promote or listen to. It emerges from the way teams solve problems under pressure and from the subtle signals the system sends. If high performers are ignored, that becomes culture. If poor behavior is overlooked, that becomes culture. If problem solving is rewarded, that becomes culture. Culture isn't a set of values. It's the repeated behaviors that the system reinforces, intentionally or unintentionally. When we understand these forces, we stop trying to fix culture from the outside and start shaping it through the everyday decisions that actually define how the organization works. Culture isn't a mystery. It's a system with patterns that can be mapped and understood. We start with the surface layer, the visible norms. These are the behaviors people perform in public, how meetings run, how decisions get made, how people speak to each other. It's the part of culture everyone can see, but it's also the shallowest layer. Beneath that sit the hidden rules, the real operating system. These determine what feels safe or unsafe, which topics are avoided, who really has influence, and how honest people can be without consequences. Most leaders underestimate this layer, but it's often the source of resistance or momentum. And then there's the reinforcement layer, the system structures that shape behavior. What gets rewarded? What gets approved? What gets budget? What gets ignored? These reinforcement mechanisms either strengthen the culture you want or quietly anchor people back into the old ways. A culture map helps leaders visualize all 3 layers together so they can understand not just what people do, but why they do it, and what needs to change to build a healthier, more adaptive culture. Culture doesn't resist change because people are difficult. Culture resists change because the old rules are still in place. When the deep, unspoken norms remain untouched, the system continues to reward the same behaviors that leaders say they want to move away from. And when new behaviors feel unsafe, too exposed, too risky, teams quietly revert back to what they know. The greatest source of cultural resistance is the gap between what leaders say and what leaders consistently reinforce. People don't follow the message, they follow the reality. When we talk about culture, there are really only two ways organizations attempt to build it: the wrong way and the right way. The wrong way treats culture as a branding exercise. You see posters on walls, values printed on mouse pads, speeches at all hands meetings, but none of it changes how people actually experience the workplace. And because the words don't match the behaviors, trust erodes. People quickly learn that the real rules are unspoken and usually enforced through fear, inconsistency, or the loudest voice in the room. The right way looks very different. It starts with leaders who model the behaviors they expect. It's reinforced by systems that reward the culture you want, not the habits you're trying to eliminate. And most importantly, it happens every single day in small moments. How decisions get made, how people are treated under pressure, how teams solve problems, and how safe it feels to speak up. When those small moments align, culture becomes a living system, not a slogan. And the stronger that system becomes, the more it pulls the organization in the right direction, automatically, consistently, and sustainably. This is the difference between culture as a message and culture as a force. Culture doesn't sit off to the side of the organization. It's woven through everything people do, every decision they make, and every behavior they repeat. And when we connect culture into the try model, the entire system finally becomes clear. Execution is what people actually do on a daily basis: the behaviors, routines, and habits that move the organization forward. Capability represents the structural and human systems that make those behaviors possible: the tools, processes, resources, and clarity people need to act. Culture sits on top of those two layers. It determines which behaviors get reinforced, which ones fade away, and which ones are considered safe or unsafe. Culture is the invisible code that tells people, this is how we do things here. But none of this is static. That's where performance intelligence comes in. PI is the early warning system. It detects cultural drift long before it becomes visible in engagement scores, customer outcomes, or project delays. PI catches the small signals: rising friction, declining psychological safety, bottlenecks, behavioral overload, and tells leaders where culture is beginning to bend. Together, these four elements create a living system. Execution shows the actions. Capability provides the support. Culture determines the pattern. And performance intelligence ensures the pattern stays healthy and aligned with the mission. Culture is not random. It has structure. And once leaders see that structure, they can finally shape it with intention. The culture mapping tool breaks an organization into three layers. First are the surface norms, the visible behaviors, rituals, and interaction patterns that everyone can observe: how people run meetings, how they speak to one another, what happens when decisions get made. Beneath that layer are the hidden rules, the unwritten boundaries that people learn quickly but rarely say out loud. What feels safe, what feels risky, who speaks freely, and who stays quiet. And at the center are the reinforcement structures, the forces that actually determine what sticks, who gets rewarded, who gets supported, where resources flow, what the system encourages, and what it quietly shuts down. Culture changes only when all three layers shift together. This tool helps leaders see the full picture, reveal misalignment, and understand why culture behaves the way it does, so they can rewire it with intention instead of hope. The drift you never notice until it's too late. Cultural collapse almost never starts with a dramatic event. It starts with drift, quiet, subtle, and completely invisible to people inside the system. In this company, everything looked fine from the outside. Performance dashboards were green, targets were being hit, leaders were optimistic. On paper, nothing was wrong. But internally, small fractures were spreading. Teams stopped challenging bad decisions because the last person who did got labeled difficult. People stayed silent in meetings because the safest option was to say nothing. Rules that were clearly written down were ignored if they got in the way of speed. And leaders, unintentionally, praised the teams who broke processes, not the teams who followed them. Slowly, the hidden rules replaced the official values. And when hidden rules take over, the culture starts steering itself. Months later, the organization finally noticed the symptoms: turnover rising, trust dropping, tension increasing, and good people behaving in strange ways. But by then, the culture had already collapsed, not because of one big failure, but because thousands of small moments were never corrected. Culture doesn't fall in a day. It erodes moment by moment until one day you look around and realize the system you built isn't the system you're living in. Every culture shifts for one of two reasons: by accident or by leadership. Slide 14 introduces the Culture Leader Playbook, which gives leaders a repeatable structure for shaping culture deliberately, not reactively. First is the Culture Mapping Worksheet, your tool for identifying the 3 layers that drive behavior: the visible norms, the hidden rules, and the reinforcement loops that sustain them. When leaders map these layers, they stop guessing and start seeing the real forces shaping their organization. Next is the Behavioral Load Assessment. Burnout doesn't come from effort. It comes from conflicting expectations, unclear rules, and too many required behaviors with too little support. This assessment helps leaders diagnose where behavioral overload is quietly draining trust and capability. The third tool is the Reinforcement Loop Analyzer. Culture is built not by what organizations say, but by what they consistently reward. This tool exposes mismatches, those moments where old behaviors get rewarded, even when they contradict the new direction. Finally, leaders get a set of conversation prompts designed to break silence, surface assumptions, and create psychological safety. Because culture changes fastest when leaders change the conversations they're having with their teams. Together, these tools form a practical playbook, not theory, practice, a way to build culture intentionally, consistently, and sustainably. Culture isn't built by slogans or posters. It's built by the choices we normalize, the behaviors we reinforce, and the moments leaders often don't realize people are watching. Across this episode, we've seen how culture evolves, not in big announcements, but in micro signals, in the quiet rules people learn from each other, and in the systems that reward one behavior while quietly punishing another. Strong culture creates alignment, trust, and momentum. Weak culture creates drift, slow, quiet, and almost invisible, until one day the organization realizes the system they intended to build is no longer the system they're living in. But here's the good news. Culture isn't fate, it's a system, and systems can be steered. In the next episode, we bring everything together. Execution, the work we do. Capability, what makes that work possible. And culture, what makes it stick, scale, and stay aligned when pressure rises. And we'll take the next step with the leadership layer that ties it all together, the sensing and alignment discipline that keeps organizations from drifting off course and helps leaders catch signals early while change is still steerable. Because transformation doesn't succeed through plans alone. It succeeds when leaders create a culture where the right behaviors don't need to be forced. They happen naturally. Episode 5 is where the try model becomes a living system. This is where change stops being a project and becomes a capability your organization carries forward. I'll see you in the next episode.